In a universe full of ideas, we draw likeness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Strange Bedfellows. I'm your host, Laurie Spencer. My usual co-host, the one, the only, Rick Walker, is taking the weekend off. I know, it's shocking. He never takes a night off, but he's taking the whole weekend off because it's a big event in his life. His daughter is getting married, and Daddy is going to walk his little girl down the aisle. So we hope that Rick is having a great time this Saturday night with his family, and I'm going to do my best to keep you entertained, and we're going to have a great time here on Strange Bedfellows. I have a terrific guest on tap for you tonight, and in fact, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our guest. His name is Jay Sadler. He's a broadcaster, podcaster, goes by the name of Jay Scott, and he's the host of the Jay Scott Ascension podcast, a show that I really enjoy, and I hope you guys check it out. He's an independent writer. He's the founder of the Ascension Media Club, and he's a Bitcoin advocate. He founded a grassroots movement in the Turks and Caicos Islands, the TCI Tech Initiative, that advocated for diversifying the economy through investing in STEM education, creating a business-friendly local tech ecosystem, and embracing Bitcoin and blockchain to decentralize the local economy. And on the show that he does, his content centers around all of his passions, which includes organic gardening and politics, of course, finance, ancient history, spirituality, and holistic health. He's currently a volunteer on the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign. That's how I met Jay. And Jay says that he believes that Bobby stands the best chance at unifying America and moving our country in the right direction. And I couldn't agree more with that. So without further ado, I want to bring Jay in. Everyone say hello to our friend. We're just going to call him Jay Scott because that's his broadcast. That's his official broadcast name. Hi, Jay. How you doing?
Hey, Laurie. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Appreciate you bringing me on, and I'm looking forward to speaking. So, yes, I'm doing good. What about you?
I'm doing great. We were going to have you last weekend, but you had something much more important to do. You were celebrating your birthday.
Yes. 34.
34. Oh, you're just a youngin', just a kid. Actually, you're getting to that age where you're kind of old enough to know better, but still too young to care.
Pretty much. Well, I've known better for a long time. It hasn't stopped me. So, I'm still enjoying myself. So I'm in the mid-30s range, you could say right now, but I feel like I'm in my 20s. So,
Well, it looked like you were having a great birthday. You're down there in Austin, my old hometown. I grew up in Austin, Texas, and spent most of my life there. And it looked like you were up on were you in a hotel? Like you're in the sauna there with the skyline behind you?
Good question. So I live in Austin, but I actually took a quick road trip over to Houston.
Oh, you were in Houston.
My birthday weekend. Yeah. So I had Airbnb actually over in one of the high rises over there, and yes, they had a beautiful infinity pool actually, like overlooking the city. So we stayed in there till just about the sun came down, then hopped in the jacuzzi, then went out and enjoyed the town a little bit. So, it was a good night, a little bit of everything, had the educational side too. We stopped by the Space Museum, and then it went go-karting. So,
Go-karting? All right.
Exactly. So adrenaline. No, this is serious go-karting though. This is the Andretti Speedway go-karting. So they go up to like, I want to say 30, 40 miles an hour or something. So trust me, I was skating all over the track. So
Dude,
it was
awesome.
good, but yeah, I had some fun. So for sure.
I love it.
Yes.
Well, you've probably seen this show before, and you kind of know the general idea, the concept of strange bedfellows is, as Shakespeare wrote, politics makes strange bedfellows. And we like to bring together people from all sides of the political spectrum. Sometimes we're total opposites, but then we sit down and we have a conversation and we find out that we actually have a lot more in common than we think, and we agree more than we disagree, and we're often friends in real life. And you and I have become really good friends
Yep.
since we met through the RFK campaign, and you've had me on your show a couple of times. So I wanted to return the favor, bring you on Maverick News, bring you on Strange Bedfellows, and introduce you to our audience, because I know they're going to love you too, just like I do. Our audience here tends to be more libertarian and conservative. But we've also had guests from the left on the show many times, and I always like to start the conversation to find out more about your political journey, because this is a political show, and I'm always interested to know what got you interested in politics, when you got interested in your life, what your political journey's been like, and how you would describe yourself politically. Are you a Democrat, an independent? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so right now I would definitely call myself an independent. If you had spoken to me a few years ago before COVID, I would have said, I lean a lot more towards the Democratic side. But during COVID, I would say I'm smack in the middle now. So
Is that how the Democrats lost you? Were you a
that's how they
Democrat before
officially
COVID?
lost me. And don't get me wrong, I was on the edge since I saw them cheat Bernie, not once but twice, and I saw him, fold. But I guess I realized how far gone the party really was when COVID hit. And then recently, I've also read Whitney Webb's book, which I know I mention at least once every time we talk, One Nation Under Blackmail. But it really is that powerful of a book, because it kind of shows you how deep the corruption runs on both sides. And now in my opinion, I think both parties are actually gone beyond repair, but more so the Democratic side, I would say. So that's kind of how I feel about the current state of politics. But
Tell me a little bit about how you got interested in politics, because most young people, it seems, don't have much interest in it. Was it something that even as a kid you were interested in, or did that happen later in life?
So, well, I grew up in Turks and Caicos, which is a tiny country, right, north of Haiti, right at the end of the Bahamian chain. So, to be honest, my first introduction to politics was kind of, following the elections over there. And then, of course, we did see the elections on TV. And my mom is an American citizen too. So she would still, follow politics. And back then, she was a real big Bill Clinton supporter, but I didn't really pay too much attention to American politics back in those days. So at first, I would say I was introduced to it in Turks and Caicos, which is, a funny place to do it, because over there, how in America you have the Democrat Party, which is, supposed to lean left, and you have Republicans that are supposed to lean right. In Turks and Caicos, you have the PDM and the PNP, the People's Democratic Movement, and the Progressive National Party, and there's really no difference, like between them philosophically. It's really just different personalities. So, and still, you see the exact same kind of tribalism over there that you see in America. So that was kind of my introduction to it. So, I kind of realized how the economy in Turks and Caicos got moving when we started getting some international investment, and how things picked up pace over there. And I'd love to come back to that a little bit later in the conversation if we touch on economics at all. But, that was my start in politics. And then when I came to America, I guess I got more interested in it because of my college education. I studied economics when I was in college, and I actually got involved in a program called the Fund for American Studies Capital Semester. So what that is it's a internship and a semester abroad over in DC. Well, at a different school, I should say. And I actually went to Georgetown University over there, where I studied public policy and how fiscal and monetary policy, impact the economy, as well as interned for an organization called the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association, which is a fancy word for the lobbyist company for the oil companies, the lobbyist organization for the oil companies, I should say. So, I kind of got an introduction to the lobbying side of politics over there, and I kind of just got thrown straight in, and I saw, like how it worked, and how lobbyists kind of give out money depending on how people vote on bills, all that fun stuff. So I always thought something was kind of funny. And, I would say, a few years from that point, becoming a little bit more disappointed, I guess you could say, like in the system, because when I was in college, I thought everything worked properly and people were really honest, like up at the top. And then the more I understood and the more I figured out what was going on, the more, I guess, disillusioned, is the word you could use. So, I was never really too excited about it back then. But then when Bernie Sanders came around, he had a few economic policies, I definitely agreed with a lot. I would say the biggest one being Medicare for all at the time. Also, I liked his ideas on raising the minimum wage, on getting money out of politics, which is something he talked about a lot. My brother, lives in the UK. We're a British colony, so I see, the differences between the UK and America in terms of, workers' rights and how they're treated. So, I can appreciate a lot of what the left says and what they want to do in theory. But then when I saw, how the Democrats, were moving,
my boy wanted to say hello. This is that's his.
As soon
butt.
as I mention the Democrats, she pops
That's
up
Jack.
and shows her butt. That's what
Hi,
she thinks
Jack.
about the Democrats, apparently. So I feel you. I'm right there with her. So yeah, that's a little bit of like the evolution, I would say, up until Bernie Sanders. Then I saw Bernie Sanders roll over, and get cheated during the campaign, and I kind of lost faith in that side of the party. So before RFK Jr. came along, to be honest with you, I wasn't really seeing too much hope in politics, and because COVID took my skepticism to another level when I saw how carried away the Democrats got, and how the entire, not even just the elected officials, but all the agencies and all the other systems we have in the world kind of aligned with what was clearly, in my opinion, the wrong strategies. I just became a little bit, even more disillusioned. So now, that's kind of where I am today. And I was extremely excited when I saw RFK running because of the fact that he was one of the few people that was telling the whole truth during the pandemic about what was going on to the best of his knowledge. And, I'm sure maybe he got one or two minor things wrong somewhere, but overall, his message has been purely based on the facts. He's been saying the same things that Democrats used to say before they started taking big pharma money.
That's right.
And when he launched his campaign in Boston, talking about how the Ukraine war was bankrupting the country and how we need to end the war economy and transition it, that really struck a personal, I guess you could say, nerve for me, which got me even more excited because even though I grew up in Turks and Caicos, I was born in Jamaica. My family's Jamaican. And for those who don't know, the CIA had a little bit of a hand, in the situation Jamaica is in today.
Just a little. A lot.
Yeah. They were, cut a long story short, they funneled a bunch of guns and drugs into Jamaica because our chief minister at the time refused to condemn Castro, and he kind of wanted to, not condemn anybody. And outside of that, there's less evidence for this. But if you look at the evidence that's out there, a lot of people in Turks and Caicos do believe that our first chief minister could have possibly been assassinated by the U.S. government.
Yes.
He was the youngest chief minister in the world at the time, actually, in history. He was only, I think, 27 when he got elected, but he had some connections with, the Black Panthers and some of the same organizations in America that was kind of being surveilled by the FBI and CIA. So because I've seen foreign policy, affect American foreign policy affects so many different countries. And I also see, the effect it's having here in America too, because people think foreign policy affects far away lands, but it actually affects America too, because the crisis we're seeing at the border is partially driven by that. The inflation we're seeing of our currency is, happening in part to finance, all these wars, and resources that could be spent building up infrastructure, schools, and helping people is instead being used to bomb mostly Black and brown people, and now Ukrainians, like over in Europe too. So now the war has come to Europe. The war machine has come to Europe. And now, we're just seeing the beginning of this refugee crisis is going to happen in Europe. But, I really hope Europe finds a way to kind of like, I guess, rein this in, because Ukraine is a very big country, and refugees can really, impact countries when, a lot of them come. So it affects a lot of different things. It affects where you want to vacation. It affects your dollar and how far that goes. And, it affects, the border and, all kinds of different things. So there's a few reasons I was really excited about his campaign, but mostly because, every time I hear him talk, I agree with him a little bit more, and I like him a little bit more. And I was on board from the beginning. So
yes, you were.
Yes,
You were there from day one. That's how we met.
I was.
Speaking of economics, tell me how you got into Bitcoin and why you're so passionate about it.
So the reason I'm so passionate about it is because it solves many different problems at the same time. So number one, what we saw happen to the truckers in Canada when they were protesting against the vaccine mandates, and most of them were vaccinated, they just protested against the mandates, and they got called. It was a peaceful protest full of diverse truckers of all different backgrounds, and they got called white supremacists.
That's right.
Because of the fact that they were against vaccine mandates. And then they used that completely manufactured excuse to cut off their bank accounts and the bank accounts of people who donated to them. So I was actually a fan of Bitcoin before that, but that example right there really taught me the importance of having a monetary system that isn't centrally, controlled, and they can't turn it off just if you disagree with them. So that's a big part of the reason why I like Bitcoin. Also, if you look at how inflation works, one of the ways it works is essentially the government prints a bunch of money to finance war. This money winds up going into different markets, but mostly the American stock market. And it's created what is, in my opinion, a pyramid scheme of the stock market. So that's going to be very controversial to a lot of people. But if I could take a quick route to explain what I mean by that, quick sidetrack. If you bought into a company, you would expect that you would make your money from the profits of that company. Like if I told you, Lori, I'm buying a piece of Disney because I want to be a part owner in Disney. The reason, you should be buying it should be because you're expecting a share of the profits. However, what the stock market has turned into is really a pyramid scheme, because the way you make most of your money is through the appreciation of the stock, which is highly speculative, and it's driven by all the extra liquidity that's flooded onto the market. So all this money that gets printed, some of it goes into stock companies, but it essentially winds up filtering into the American stock market. So I call it a pyramid scheme because the only way you make your money is by someone else cashing you out, which is the exact definition of a pyramid scheme. So because all this money is being flooded into the market, what it does is it devalues savings, and it can devalue other assets too. So if I'm not, an investor in BlackRock and Vanguard, and I don't own a significant percentage of this stock that's appreciating, and I have my money in a bank account, I'm watching the value of my money go down because the supply is going up, so each dollar is worth less. But all this extra supply is being concentrated in the stock market. So what Bitcoin does is it removes the Federal Reserve's and the elite's ability to do that, and it would turn Bitcoin into the primary savings mechanism. And we would have a situation where when you buy into a stock, it's not all about the price appreciation, but it's more actually about how much dividends you're getting from the stock and what can be made from the stock. It's not highly speculative price appreciation because, you know, one of the, I guess, calculations people would use to assess the value of a stock is something called the price to earnings ratio. So that means the earnings of the stock right now versus the price, because that's how you should be justifying, you know, the price of the stock. Does the stock make enough money to justify its price? And the largest section of the stock market right now is actually tech, which is why you have the Nasdaq Nasdaq 500. No, I believe it's Nasdaq 200. Anyway, the Nasdaq. So the Nasdaq is all tech stocks. It's the largest portion of it's the largest portion of the stock market, and it is. I'm sorry, and the tech stocks overall have the worst price to earnings ratio. So that means the price of the stock far exceeds all the earnings in the industry. So we're all buying stocks whose earnings don't really justify the price of the stock, but we're buying it in the hopes that someone else is going to cash us out later down the road. So Bitcoin can kind of put an end to that pyramid scheme and make it so savings are really savings. They don't lose their value. Stocks actually have a value that makes sense. And more important, well, you know, most importantly, it gives you the ability to self-custody, you know, your own assets. And of course, it's the most efficient way to do it too, because you can store, you know, millions of dollars on one little hard drive. Whereas if you wanted to store that in gold, then, you know,
imagine storing that under your mattress.
Exactly, you know? Exactly. So there's a ton of reasons why Bitcoin, you know, like is a really powerful tool, but long story short, it has the ability to remove a lot of the corruption, and it takes control of the money supply out the hands of the Federal Reserve, which is actually something that, you know, RFK's late great uncle had done while he was in office. He was the only person, well, only two presidents removed the power of private entities to print money. That was JFK. And do you know who the other one is, Lori?
It's Abraham Lincoln, wasn't it?
It was Abraham Lincoln. Those are the only two people to remove the power of the private sector to print money. So Bitcoin does that. It gives us control of our own money supply. And if you think about it, we're in a world right now where money has advanced to the point where I don't think we're going back to only cash. Like, because things are so convenient, you know, like monetizing, you know, your work online. If you had to wait, Lori, on someone to mail in, you know, a $5 bill every month for their subscription to your channel, that would make it a little bit more difficult to make money. So because we already have a system where digital money is kind of now, you know, intertwined in our day of life, in our daily life, we're either going to have to accept, you know, the government controlling it or private entities controlling our money supply who are directly controlled by the government. So it's either directly or indirectly the government controls it, or we could do it in a publicly accountable yet pseudonymous fashion through Bitcoin, where you can see every transaction, but you don't necessarily know who owns the wallet. Like, and you can set the system up in a way where people who need to know that information can get access to it, but there can be checks and balances in place to kind of control that. So
a little more privacy in your financial matters.
Yeah. Exactly. And that
without the government looking at every transaction you make, and the IRS looking at every transaction over $600, right?
And that's what they want to do right now. And
they are doing
I think and decentralized identity actually is a key part in that, because we will need to have an online identity. It's just a question, are we going to be in control of it, and will we know who's accessing our information and why, or will it be completely out of our control? If we leave it to centralized entities, we know we're not going to have any control, but it is possible to build a decentralized identification system like what they have in Estonia. And this is actually what I was promoting over in Turks and Caicos, which is they have a whole separate legal framework in Estonia where your digital identity has the same rights as your physical personhood. So the same way how your physical personhood is protected against unwarranted searches and seizures. I forget which amendment it is, but they have their own Bill of Rights for your online. Exactly, the fourth. There you go. They have their own Bill of Rights for their online identity, and they have full control or full knowledge, at least, of who's accessing their information and why. So not even your doctor can look at your patient files without you getting a notification that someone is accessing your information. So
awesome.
Exactly. So the framework for this already exists out there. It's just a question of, when can we do it like over here in America? And, obviously they don't want to do it because, that level of transparency will prevent them from doing a lot of the things that, they do behind the scenes right now. So,
and that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's one of the main reasons that you're supporting Robert Kennedy, because he's against the central bank digital currency.
Exactly.
He's pro Bitcoin. I think he's the only presidential candidate in the race who accepts donations via cryptocurrency, Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Exactly. And, a lot of people think, Bitcoin, anyone who speaks about Bitcoin is looking at it as a get rich quick scheme. And a lot of people did make a ton of money like Bitcoin. If you bought it when it was, a couple dollars or a few cents, like you're rolling in it right now. But it's not going to see that kind of appreciation anymore. So don't think you can invest $100 in Bitcoin today and you're going to have $1 million in a few years' time. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is why I think it's such a powerful tool is because the BRICS, which I haven't even touched on yet, is currently, even without the BRICS, we're printing so much money that simple supply and demand shows when the supply is so great, the price of it is going to go down. So now when you combine the fact that BRICS nations are presenting alternatives to the dollar, if countries stop holding U.S. Treasury debt, like inflation is going to hit quickly. So, we have two options at that point. We either let the wealth concentrate further and we watch the value of all of our savings tank, or we transition to a new system and Bitcoin allows us the opportunity to do that. And if we don't, we'll also essentially be bowing to China because China will have the reserve currency of the world, the yuan, and we'll be dependent on what they want to do with the yuan. So the choice in the long run is either painfully wait on the US dollar to implode and feel every little devaluation, or we transition to a better system. And RFK Jr. Has an excellent plan of backing up the US dollar actually with Bitcoin while protecting people's right to own and save it. So what it does is it extends the life of the dollar. And if he's successful when he's successful in closing down those military bases, ending the wars and bringing that spending down, then we could see the dollar, possibly reverse course. Because at the end of the day, America still has a lot of positives, with all the negatives, like that we have over here. Overall, we are the most stable country in that, financial position. So if we can find a way to turn it around, RFK, I believe, could bring back confidence from the whole world, because that's what his uncle had. His uncle was the most loved president, in American history, at least across the globe, and he has that same spirit. No matter how much mainstream media tries to deny it, no matter how much they try to say, oh, but some of your brothers disagree with you. I can feel it, I can see it. And whether you agree with him or not, which I do on most issues except Israel, whether you agree with him or not, you can tell that, he means well. You can tell that he's being honest and he's doing the best that he can. And he is really intelligent. Every time he speaks, I learn something from him. So.
Absolutely. And, if Bobby were not in the race, I'm glad he is, but let's just say for a moment that he didn't get into the race. Who of the available candidates would you be supporting if Bobby wasn't there? Anybody?
If I had to pick one, Cornel West.
And because, I probably would too, until I saw the Jimmy Dore interview Friday.
The reason why I still have to go with him, to be honest with you, is because, On COVID, I'm not going to get anything better from Trump or Biden, in my opinion. And in my opinion, Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy are a little too bad on some of the other issues that I couldn't see myself supporting them. And I know, people
they
may
want war
disagree
with
with me on
China.
that, but yeah.
It
Yeah,
seems
Vivek.
anyway.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis wants to invade Mexico. And Vivek Ramaswamy wants to invade China. So it's like if
That's
you're
right.
against war, I don't see how you can like be supporting either of them. But that's
Yeah.
just me.
Yeah, the
So
GOP field is just, I mean, outside of Trump, they're a bunch of war happy neocons.
yeah,
Even Vivek, who says he doesn't want the war in Ukraine, but he wants a war with China. So
yeah.
either way, you're going to get a war. It's just a question of which country do we decide to pick a fight with.
Well, I think that's
Um,
the whole game, right? Lesser of two evils, right? Well, you don't
yes.
want the Ukraine war because, you may not hate Russia, but you hate China, right? So, who do you want to hate more?
Right.
You want to go to war with Russia or China? So,
It's like how the Democrats have the bug in their brain, the Putin
mm,
derangement syndrome, Russia derangement syndrome, and then you on the right, you've got the China derangement syndrome on the
mhm,
Republican side. Neither of these countries, in my opinion, mean us harm.
yes,
But they do want to be competitive on the world stage, and we're
yeah,
trying to stop that, just as we did during the first Cold War when we were embargoing technology to Russia, to China,
mhm,
blowing up their pipelines and stuff like that. Just anything we could to destroy them
yeah,
economically. And here we are playing that same old game again.
and
Tell me a little bit. Yeah, did you want to say something real quick?
yeah. On that note, I agree with you 100%, Lori. And what I would encourage people to do, if they think Russia or China really wants to harm the U.S., just follow the money. That's all
Mm,
I'd encourage you to do. Look at how much America spends on the military and on military bases around the world, and then look at how much both of those countries spend. Their budget looks more like a defense budget where they have their army within the country. They spend money on training and they have a big nuclear arsenal in case someone tries to mess with them. But they don't have bases all over the world. China has a few of them, I think, it's less than five. And Russia has, less than five too. So if
yep.
they wanted to harm America, they would be trying to set up military bases in Central America, the Caribbean, like stuff like that. They haven't done any of
China
that.
literally has one military base outside of
Yeah,
their own territory.
exactly. Exactly. So,
So tell me
so
what you like about Cornel West's policies. What is it that appeals to you about Cornell?
sure. So, I overall, when it comes to economic policy, I think if you were to go back to before COVID, people don't realize this, but economic mobility was actually higher in these European economies that most people call socialist on this side of the world. But if you actually speak to them over there, they consider themselves capitalists. They consider themselves they wouldn't consider themselves socialists or communists. But if you look at the differences in some of their policies, long story short, they have a social safety net with the right incentives that ensures people aren't lazy and dependent on the system, but that everyone has an equal opportunity to be able to make something of themselves. So what I think political philosophy should come down to is making sure that everyone has equal opportunity. And I think that there are some policies on the left, not all, but there are some policies on the left that can help that happen. I think if you look at one of the biggest costs coming out of people's paychecks right now, you have your health insurance coming out of your paycheck. So the cost of health insurance is
Mm,
extremely high. And
you're telling
how
me.
to yeah, and if you look at how much these other developed countries spend on it, they all actually spend less per capita on their health insurance, and you have a higher percentage of people who are happy with the services they get. Now, when it comes down to some of the specialties and maybe some of the more advanced surgeries, I do know that there's an argument that America has the best doctors in the world. Some of that maybe due to the size of America. Some of that
Yeah,
maybe
because they can make more money here.
you can
In a
make more
private
money.
healthcare system, they can charge what they want, and there's hardly any
Yes.
regulation on that. So, you know, my co-host Rick Walker here at Maverick News, we talk a lot about that because I want Medicare for all.
Hmm.
I'm chronically ill with long COVID, and I've racked up more than $1 million in medical bills in the last 3.5 years since I got
Wow.
COVID. I was hospitalized. I've been a lab rat, guinea pig for all kinds of experimental treatments, and let me tell you, that stuff costs money, and I don't have health insurance. So
Wow.
it's all been pretty much cash pay out of pocket, and it's just killing me.
Lord,
And
that's
I'm not
terrible.
alone.
That's terrible. And one of the things that people in America, I don't think realize is, medical bankruptcy, I believe, is it's either the most common reason why people have to declare bankruptcy or it's
Yep.
second. It's either first or second. And
Yep.
that problem is literally unique to America. If you're
Yeah.
talking about developed countries, America is the only developed country, I should say, in the world where people can go broke from getting sick. So,
That's right.
I definitely don't think we should set up a system where people aren't incentivized to work. And at the end of the day, I don't consider myself a socialist or a capitalist because I think, like those labels are meaningless. But if you look at a
Kind of
country
somewhere
like
in the middle.
exactly. I'm
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle because if you look at a country like Singapore, for example, it's often touted as a capitalist haven, right? Like
Mhm.
this is the example of what capitalist economies can do. But one part of the story that often gets left out is the government was actually the original owner in much of the housing, and they used what I would consider a socialist program to ensure that their own people, like who were there, have high home ownership rates because
Mhm.
they set up a special accounts where the government would match, the money that you're putting in. So it is redistribution of wealth when you think about it because
Well,
some
that's
people
why
pay
they
more in
don't have
taxes.
people
Yeah,
sleeping under bridges and in
exactly,
parks and
exactly,
on the streets.
exactly,
Everybody has a home in a socialist
exactly.
country. Whether you like socialism or not, you probably don't like to see people outside your window on your street sleeping in a tent, pooping on the street, doing drugs out there in broad daylight.
Mhm.
And yet, a lot of my friends on the right, they think socialism's bad, and we definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to give people health care or housing. That's communism. And I'm like, but look at the communist countries. Look how clean their cities are. Look how you don't see homeless people on the streets. Look how everybody has a home. Look how when you get sick, they have health care and it doesn't cost them anything. And, these are, in my opinion, and I'm a libertarian who likes as little government as possible, but I'm
Mhm.
willing to compromise with the left on things like Medicare for all because I see it as a benefit to the country, to our society, to everyone. We need to solve this homelessness crisis that we're in. And, that's another reason, of course, why I support Kennedy. He's not even so far to the left that he's willing to say he's going to get Medicare for all done. He's a realist. When he's
Mhm.
asked about that, he says that in principle, he agrees with it. He wants Medicare for all. But the political reality is that the president can't do that by executive
Alone.
order. That's
Yeah.
unconstitutional. So it has to go through the Congress. And Democrats have been promising, well, at least for the last 30 years, in 1992, when Bill Clinton and Nancy Pelosi and
Single
Chuck
payer.
Schumer and all those Democrats of the 90s came in, and they're still sitting in power to this day, including Joe
Mhm.
Biden. Pretty much all of them were saying, we're going to give you single payer health care, universal health care.
You know,
And then they
Nancy
didn't.
Pelosi, she even agreed with it at one point too, right? Back
Oh,
in the early
yeah.
part of her career, she was
1992.
all for single payer. Now, won't even let people have a vote on it. So,
Right. That's right. And, that's how the Clintons got elected.
mhm.
That was really the one issue that pushed them into power in 1992 was they were promising people universal health care and they didn't deliver, and they've had 30 years to deliver, and these same Congress critters are still sitting there, but now they're owned. They're owned by big pharma. and they know who their daddy is, and they're not about to give you universal health care or anything like it. The
Yeah.
closest you'll get is Obamacare,
Yeah,
right?
and the funny thing about Obamacare is it's actually just a giveaway to the insurance companies, because all it does is it mandates that, like, everyone has to either pay a fine and taxes, at the end of the year for not having health care, or like they are gonna. Well, that's what it did originally. I think it got struck down now, so I don't know exactly, like, how it works at this point, but. Yeah, they did the exact opposite. And the funny thing about that is, depending on how that question is framed, it does actually have, well, it had at one point, I don't know if it's still there, but over 50% approval from the right. Like if you ask people on the right, do you want, government run healthcare, they'll say no. But if you ask them, would you like a single payer system, where that everyone pays into, and guarantees everyone healthcare? Over 50% of people say yes to that.
Well,
So,
yes, and my
yeah.
friends on the right, I should play devil's advocate here because I have a lot of conservative tendencies. I'm a libertarian and I have a lot of friends on the right.
Mhm.
They say that they understand there's a social responsibility in our society to look after those who are elderly, who are disabled, who are less fortunate, that we as taxpayers do have some responsibility to look after them. But
Yeah.
they want a private option, which I think is very reasonable.
Yeah, I would
Bob
support
Kennedy
that.
agrees with me. And
Yeah, I would
the
support that.
complaint that I hear, and I think it's a valid one, I'm going to play like I'm Rick Walker because Rick's not here. But when we have these conversations, Rick's up in Canada where they do have Medicare for all. They literally call it, Medicare up there,
Mhm.
Canada Health. And every citizen of Canada has health care, but there's no private option. And their system is so fucked up. Jay, you wouldn't believe the stories that we hear on Maverick News from the Canadian citizenry every day about the long waits for simple procedures, hallway healthcare. When you go to the emergency room, take you 2 days to get admitted to the hospital, and you're sitting out there on a gurney in the hallway waiting to get admitted to a room for days. And people die waiting for healthcare up there too. So it's
Wow.
not perfect, and
Yeah.
it's not the utopia that a lot of American leftists think it is.
Yeah, that's true.
It
I was
is
gonna say.
not perfect, and that's why, as a libertarian, I question the only hesitation that I have about
Mhm.
it because I want it.
Mhm.
But do I trust the government to run it? I mean, look at our government here in the United States. They're corrupt to the hilt. They're owned by big pharma. What if they mandated, say, a little Kool-Aid? That's what we
Yeah.
call it, the thing
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
arm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
What
know
if they
what you mean.
mandated that, and if you didn't take it, they pull your health care and you can't
Yeah.
get your asthma medications or what have you, your diabetes medicine,
Yes.
life-saving, life-sustaining medications. They could
Yeah.
have that kind of control over us if we give it to them. And so
That
I
that
strongly
is a
feel
fair
that there
point.
should be a private option
Yeah,
for healthcare.
that is definitely a fair point, and one that I would agree with. I don't know too much about the Canadian healthcare system, so I can't really comment on that. What I
Yeah.
can say though, is that my brother, who lives over in the UK, he has had, one or two, health issues pop up over his life, and it's been pretty easy,
Mhm.
for him to get those fixed. The same thing with my biological mother. So I know I have family over there, and I haven't really heard anyone, like complain about it in the
Right.
UK. I know in the
At
UK
least they're
there
not
is,
getting $1 million bills in the
yeah,
mail,
exactly,
you know,
exactly,
like we
exactly,
do.
and yeah, like no one declares bankruptcy, like you said over
That's
there.
right.
So he's pretty happy with it. It's worked well for him, and they have, like I said, that private option over there too. And he doesn't use the private option; he just has the regular one that everyone has, and
Mm.
it's able to work over there. But that is a complicated question though, because I do work as a recruiter, in healthcare, and I can tell you for sure that there's a gigantic shortage of healthcare workers who are in the field right now.
Right.
And because we have an aging population with less young people in it, we have to motivate more people to get into healthcare essentially. So there's a really tight workforce. So that problem that Canada is having, that
And
may
the
be
UK.
partly, yeah, that may be partly due to the way their system is set up, and it also may be partly
No, it's
due
just poorly
to,
managed.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
just terribly run. It's really badly done. And it's the same problem in the UK. That's
yeah.
why they have a tremendous shortage of nurses and healthcare workers, and the same problems that Canada has, because you have absolute imbeciles running the damn thing. And it
Well,
comes down to this: do
I
you
can tell
trust
you,
the people running it?
there's definitely a shortage over here too. Like
Yep.
and yeah, and I don't know if the shortage over here is greater than what's over there. I don't know if it's the same, but what I can tell you is that I have people. Well, I've heard of people, I should say, like who are CNAs who are taking care of 12 patients, by themselves, and like like one person,
Right.
taking care of 12 patients. So it's like this is already happening in America. There's already long wait times happening in America. And
That's
depending
right.
on the kind of insurance you have, that's going to dictate, like, do you get seen tomorrow or do you get seen, a few months from now? Because the
So
same
true.
way how you mentioned, there are long wait times in Canada. I'd be
Mhm.
interested in seeing what the wait times compare like to America overall.
Oh,
And then
I
you
can tell
also
you.
have to
I
look
can
at,
tell you. I mean, people are paying handsomely out of pocket for the privilege, because I'm a frequent visitor to my local
mm,
emergency room, unfortunately.
wow.
It's, 6 to 8 hours just to be seen, depending on the day of the week, and to be admitted, unless you're like on your deathbed, it's going to be a long, long wait.
And that's in America.
That's in America. Bless
Excuse
you.
me. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, and that's in America. So, like I said, there's challenges in the healthcare system right now that are going to be happening, whether we have Medicare for all or not. But again, just to circle it back to RFK, another one of the reasons why I'm excited about his campaign is because he's the only candidate I've ever heard in my lifetime address some of the reasons why we may have more issues over here because of what we're doing to the environment, because of what's being pumped into our food,
Why
and
we
he's
have all
trying
this
to
chronic
highlight that.
disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had caught this part, but he also said that he wants to explore some of the holistic options that would have been shut down by the
Mm,
Flexner report. So have you ever heard of the
right.
Flexner report before, Lori?
Yeah, I have, but tell our audience a little bit
Yeah.
about that. They might not have.
Yeah, so the Flexner report was actually a report that was commissioned by Rockefeller and one of his buddies back in the 1910s. I believe it was like 1914, 1915 or something like
Yeah.
that, where they essentially used the report to discredit any kind of medicine that was not I'm sorry, allopathic medicine. So it had to be the stuff that was made using plastic pills because like maybe people don't realize it, but the pills that you use, the capsules, most of the time they're made of a byproduct of oil. So
Mhm.
Rockefeller had vested interest in making sure that this was the system that was pushed above everything else. So it was used to discredit herbal medicine. It was used to discredit Eastern medicine. So all the other different types that people may think of as a little bit, quacky nowadays, but some
It
the
was good
science has
enough for my
actually
great
been
great
suppressed.
grandma.
Yeah, exactly. And trust me,
Holistic medicine worked for her.
exactly. And if you ever go to the Caribbean, they have bush medicine for almost everything over there. So, like,
Right.
am I going to say it handles the acute stuff the same way a doctor could? No, you can't break your leg and then rub it, like with some moringa and then it
Mhm.
gets healed. So, I'm not saying that there's no place for allopathic medicine. There definitely is. And I'm not saying all of it's bad, but what RFK was trying to do was open up some of the research and maybe some of the restrictions on some of those holistic methods that could provide alternatives.
The
And
stuff that big
yeah,
pharma doesn't want you to know about
exactly,
or have access
exactly,
to. Yeah,
exactly.
imagine
Because
that.
all those big pharma stuff, they're made from plants. Like so, what herbal medicine does a lot of the time is it takes you directly to the plants that some of those are, based on, and gets into some of those same compounds.
I had to do this. I
No
just had to.
worries. Yep.
I had to talk about what happened this week when
Yes.
Dr. Cornel West went on the Jimmy Dore show, and boy, it didn't go quite like either one of them had expected.
Yeah.
And I want to play you a little clip because this is honestly just painful to watch, and I want to get your reaction to it.
Right. Yeah. So that is the fascist dimension. Simply so in terms of militarism abroad, so that there's fascist elements, my brother.
Hello?
Transfer of power and so forth. That is not the same thing.
There we go.
And so that doesn't undermine my campaign at all. The campaign's about truth.
100% undermines you.
Yeah.
Before you even start. So that's just bad. You're getting bad advice. I don't know who's advising you, but they're giving you horrible advice.
January. I'm a free man.
Okay.
Brother.
So January.
But I want to hear your argument. As to how Biden is more fascist than Trump.
Trump
just lay it out right quick.
Well, I'll tell you right now. The reason why the deep state Russiagated Trump was because he wouldn't bomb enough to calm them down. So he wouldn't do enough bombing. The reason they impeached him because he wouldn't ship arms to Nazis in Ukraine, and he was against that. So that's
are you defending Trump as somehow being a person who is? I don't understand. I don't stand your argument at this point, no, man. What are we talking about?
Okay, so there's.
I want to understand what the content of your argument is, because one can, in fact, bring critique to bear on the system as a whole with the two corporate wings, but somehow, what do you say to trans, and gays, and lesbian brothers and sisters in terms of their rights?
So that's again. Joe Biden is responsible for the mass incarceration, not Donald Trump. Who is more responsible for black and brown people being locked up and America being the largest penal colony in the world? Is it Donald Trump or would it be Joe Biden? By the way, this conversation is a loser for your campaign. Sitting here trying to make the argument.
It could be a loser for you too, though.
Trying to make the argument.
You trying to make the case that somehow the Democrats are more fascist than the Republicans. The fascism cuts across the board.
But that's not how you say it, though. You say it's only Donald Trump. You don't say it cuts across the board. You call Joe Biden milquetoast, and you call Donald Trump a fascist. So you're not saying Joe Biden is a fascist, really?
I said there's fascist dimensions to the Biden project. You're absolutely right.
It's like you're campaigning for Joe Biden almost when you're doing this. That's what it sounds like.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
But that's what I'm not saying you are doing that. I'm saying that's what it sounds like.
What it sounds like to you. That's what it sounds like to you. And you got a right to be wrong. You got a right to be right. It sounds like to you. But it doesn't sound like that to a whole host of others at all, though, brother. Not at all.
All right. Again, I'm saying this out of love for you because I do have deep love for you. I have deep respect for you. And we agree on almost everything except the message of your campaign, right? That's the only thing. I would hope it would become even more focused. Well, let me just put it this way.
But are you suggesting that the message should be that Biden is a greater fascist than Trump? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that you should talk about fascism or any of that stuff. I think you should.
No, fascism is very real. I think you don't think fascism is real in the country?
We're living in it. We're living in fascism.
But I'm talking about escalating in terms of intensity.
It has since Biden became president. It certainly has escalated in intensity. They've censored everybody. They've crushed unions. They've started another war, and now they're saber rattling with 2 nuclear powers. I don't know how I don't know how worse it could get. And by the way, he still hasn't let people out of prison. He still hasn't given student loan. He's still denying us health care. He's an enemy of the worker and a tool of military-industrial complex in Wall Street. There's no bigger fascist in the country than Joe Biden. The reason why black and brown people are locked up again isn't because of Trump. It's because of brother Biden. And Joe Biden is proud of that. He brags about that. He brags about the crime bill, and he will never apologize for it. So I'm just letting you know that I really want your campaign to pick up traction. This is the opposite way to do it. Who's ever advising you sounds like an infiltrator.
But why you keep saying advise me? I'm thinking for myself, brother. I'm a
okay. I don't mean to insult you. That's not
just question with advising.
Okay.
I don't ask who's advising you. You think for yourself. You're a free man too, aren't you?
You're right. You're right. Okay. I was trying to put it in a nice way.
I use that kind of language, my brother. You want to be respectful.
I'm trying to be respectable. That was my.
I appreciate it. Okay. I know it look like hard sometimes, but I appreciate it. But we just have disagreements on these things.
Again,
undermining. If I undermine the campaign for you, then you're free to have your own view and vision.
Okay.
And people are free to listen to you and be persuaded or not. And I've got mine. I'm listening for your insight. Absolutely right. No doubt about that.
So let me just say this. So the point of running a third-party campaign is to offer an alternative to the two major parties, to bring together disaffected members of those parties, along with independents and others who feel alienated from the political system as it exists. And the best way to do this is by running on economic issues that unite us, but which neither major party is willing to address because they're both beholden to the same powerful corporate interests. The Democratic Party long ago abandoned the working class in favor of beating the drum on cultural issues, and now that's all the Democrats have to run on. So if voters are looking for a party running on trans rights and calling Donald Trump and his supporters white supremacists, they can already vote for Democrats. The role of a third party is to focus not on the identity politics that divide us, but on core economic issues that unite us along class lines, like Christian Smalls did at Staten Island. Do you think he led with LGBTQ trans rights and white supremacy, or do you think he organized along class lines? That's what we have to do. You have to organize, meet people where they are. So what is your plan to organize along class lines, or are you going to keep talking about white supremacy and all those identity politics, which are there, not from the ground up, from the top down, to make sure we stay divided? What is your plan to organize along class lines?
Well, I appreciate again the clarity and candor of what you have to say. We have profound disagreements, brother. When I organize around white supremacy, I'm not making some utilitarian calculation. I'm speaking as a black man who comes out of a tradition that's been terrorized and traumatized by white elites. And that does not in any way mean it takes me away from class issues. Class issues are crucial. Class issues are fundamental. But it doesn't mean that I'm putting up with white supremacy. One of the problems is that you get too many folk who want to talk class, and can't say a mumbling word about white supremacy, police brutality, can't say a mumbling word hardly. Or when they do say it, you call it identity politics as if it's not connected to class. I'm hitting these head on. I'm standing with the workers when it comes to strikes. I'm standing with the workers when it comes to greedy bosses. I'm standing with the workers when it comes to obsession with profits and the needs not in any way being satisfied. But I'll never for a minute be silent or not raising my voice in terms of vicious treatment of black people, indigenous people, gay brothers, lesbians, sisters, or trans. It's not an either or. And that's where you and I have a deep, profound disappointment. So if I see, for example, if I watch your show and I notice you hardly say a mumbling word about white supremacy because it's some kind of identity politics and I'm against it, but I don't want to talk about it. I only want to talk about what people hold in common. Well, black people are not going to hold it in common if you don't say a word about white supremacy, but maybe some of your white friends will. So who are you talking about when you're talking about in common? Are you talking about just the majority or what, my dear brother? I will never, ever in a million years not talk about vicious legacies of white supremacy, male supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, and others. But class will always be very much at the center. What brings you and I together is what? Our fundamental solidarity with working classes, not just here, but around the world. But oftentimes when I hear about your show and you say, well, you know, these identity politics issues get in the way. No, it's 100%. Not getting in the way. They're not getting in the way.
100%. They're used by the Democrats. That's all they have to run on. And when you say that stuff, you just sound like a Democrat because that's all they have. So if you need,
if to talk about the dignity of black people in the face of vicious white supremacy makes me sound like a Democrat, you got the wrong earplug.
Okay,
you're not listening clearly. Because if you can't hear the critique of Wall Street, if you can't hear the critique of militarism, If you can't hear the critique of his foreign policy in Ukraine, and all you can hear when they talk about white supremacy identity politics, then something's wrong with your earplug, though, bro. Something's wrong with you. Okay. We just have deep disagreement with that. But
it's disappointing.
It is what it is. You are profoundly disappointing in that sense. But if I still love you, brother.
I still love you too. I still love you too. I know you. I know I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm talking about having a campaign. I'm not. Okay,
I'll leave that there.
Yeah,
because it goes on and on and on. Jimmy called that the most disappointing 45 minutes of his life, and you could just see how crushed Jimmy was. If we have time, I might play some of what he said after Cornel left. And Cornel cut the interview short because he was uncomfortable too. He was supposed to be there for an hour, and about 30 minutes in, he was trying to make excuses. Oh, I have another meeting to get to, gotta go. And then he stuck around for, I don't know, another 10 minutes or so, but he still cut it off at like 45 minutes instead of an hour. So it was really uncomfortable for both of them. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what we just saw.
Yeah, no worries. So, I watched the interview, actually yesterday, and I watched the other reaction video where he kind of gave his thoughts after it. And overarching message, I do think that Cornel West's Trump derangement syndrome is a detriment to his campaign, and it's the way he talks about Trump versus Biden is not a way to unite the country. It's because it's like you're willing to call out, the evils on one side, but you're not as willing to call out the evils on the other side. So I think the Trump derangement syndrome is a huge roadblock to actually uniting both sides, which I think is what's really needed in the country. And
I agree.
As far as his thoughts on COVID, I know we can't get too much into it, but the reason it's important is because it's a mechanism that's being used to censor people. It also involves medical treatments, and so it does affect, and it's a tool essentially for control. So there's a big picture behind COVID, which makes it a very important issue. In my opinion, it could be possibly the most important issue right now because of how many things it's connected to. So if you're not willing to address that, I can't take you as seriously as
Cornel, man. He was just terrible on COVID. Just terrible. I mean, you can find clips of him back in 2020, 2021, and he still thinks that the vaccines are great and he has no problem with the mandates. And
actually, he did say that he leans more towards the because there's a black caucus within the Green Party, and they put out a statement that was completely contrary to what the mainstream Green Party statement was. And when Jimmy read that to him, he did say that if he could go back in time now, that he would lean more towards their perspective, but he said he would create a truth commission to find out, what's happening. But my thing is,
I did like that.
Yeah, but at the same time, you don't need a truth commission to find out what a lot of the truth is right now. And if you're not willing to talk about the things that we know, then I don't really trust you on that issue. So that being said, though, I will say that the part I did disagree with Jimmy Doran is when he tried to say that, when he said that Cornel West leads with identity politics. And I don't think that's true. If you look at his actual campaign website, I don't think, identity politics is mentioned, under his top issues. And if it is, it's something in passing. He does lead with Medicare for all. He does lead with, ending the war in Ukraine. So I get the gist of what Jimmy is saying, but I would say that, if the same way how RFK strongly believes, in his Israel stance, and it's something he's willing to get out there and march with Rabbi Shmuley on, I vehemently disagree, with his opinion there. I also think that, Cornel West, like has a right, to march for, what he believes in and to draw attention to what he believes in too. And I don't think he's made it the center of his campaign. So I personally, I love Jimmy, so I'm not trying to, do any tone correction or anything like that. But what I will say is when RFK went on, the Jimmy Dore show, he gave RFK a chance to kind of highlight the positives in his agenda and talk about some of the good things in his campaign. Whereas, as someone who's a big fan of both of these individuals, it did feel a little bit more like when Cornel West was there, Jimmy spent more of the time trying to talk about the areas, he thinks that Dr. West needs to fix. And it's perfectly his right, as an interviewer, to use his platform to get the message out that he wants to get out. So I don't want to.
And it's like he said, he was like, Cornel, I have some advice for you, and I wanted to give it to you privately. And apparently Jimmy had been reaching out to the Cornel West campaign, trying to have a private conversation with him so that he could get these things through to Dr. West to get his concerns heard. And the campaign was ignoring him hard. But so the only way he could do this was live on the show. And he really did not want to do that publicly, but he didn't have a choice because somebody in the Cornel West campaign was telling him to stay away from Jimmy Dore. And maybe that interview proved his advisors correct, but
I'm glad the interview happened still, though. I still
but he still came on and he took the fire, and I respect him for that. And another thing I respect Dr. West for, and always have, is he has a long track record as a civil rights activist. But here's the disconnect, Jay, and I don't understand this at all with a lot of Black leaders and in the Black community, and he among them, chiefly among them, was how can a guy who spent his whole life crusading for civil rights not see vaccine mandates as a civil rights issue? How can they say that the unvaccinated should be excluded from society? How can they say that anybody should be excluded from, say, public places, places of business, or from their own families based on a medical status? Again, that's segregation, brother. Dr. West, that's segregation.
100%. And, it's really disappointing, especially because, a large part of that unvaccinated population is Black people. Black people were one of the most unvaccinated demographics because Black people have a pretty abusive relationship with the U.S. government. So, they didn't trust it when it came out. So when, like Jimmy pointed out in the interview, 41% of Black businesses were permanently closed during the pandemic, and they're not coming back. So, I agree with the gist of what Jimmy was saying. I agree with, all the points, most of the points he made. I would just say, I do think Cornel West does lead with class, issues first. He just has his deeply held personal, issues with race, which I do agree with him on, for the most part. I'm sure the only thing I can say, though, if I could just, maybe offer this, one thing, I do think that Democrats and people on the left would find themselves more support from the right if they took into consideration some of the points, that are made, like on the right when it comes to some of the differences, because, I'm someone who believes that systemic racism, is real, and I can provide examples of why I believe that. However, in addition to that, if you look at, say, the study times of different children, right? If you had to guess, and they've done plenty of studies on this. Well, let me not say that. So the children who's put in the most study time by far is Asian children. So Asian children study, I believe it's like double the amount of the average white child, in the country, right? And then if you look at the study time for Black and Hispanic people, it is significantly less, than white people, right? So now we have to think to ourselves, now, what are the possible reasons behind that? Is it that, you know, the father got arrested on a marijuana charge, you know, which is, you know, a charge that unfortunately, you know, like black people are the only people who get arrested for it, you know, or the main group that gets arrested for it, I should say, even though it's
disproportionately,
yeah,
far
disproportionately,
more.
yeah, even though it's a victimless crime. So,
Yep.
you know, or is the reason that, you know, like, because the truth
And by the
is,
way, the reason
yeah,
for that is Joe Biden's crime bill of 1994.
yeah. So Joe Biden's crime bill, right?
Yeah.
So like, what's the reason why the study time is less, right? But we do know for a fact that the single motherhood rate, you know, is higher in the black community, and of course, it's possible for a single mother to, you know, raise children. However, it's more difficult, and it does mean it can be harder to manage, you know, like a child's life and, you know, discipline the child and like all these different things, you know, if you only have one parent in the household. So I do believe systemic racism does exist. However, you know, there are, you know, different cultural things that we can take a look at and analyze, you know, like, what are the reasons behind this? How did we get to the situation we have here? And, you know, I think if people on the left would just acknowledge that, yes, you know, there are contributing factors coming from all different sides, I think that would help them gain a little bit more traction, you know, with the right, you know, when it comes to drawing attention to some of these issues. But I'm a person who likes to look at data. You know, like I studied like economics with a minor in finance, and you know, I believe, you know, numbers can tell a good story if you have proper context, you know, for the numbers, and you have an understanding of how these numbers came around. So I think, you know, it's worth, you know, analyzing everyone's perspective and realizing that, you know, everyone's heart is usually in the right place, because, you know, I work with, you know, like 90% white people. I've never had, you know, like a white person be racist towards me, you know, that I work with. You know, like in a past job, I did have someone, you know, call me an unpleasant term, you know, once before. And I will say that, you know, every time I've been pulled over by the police officer, you know, which doesn't happen too often, but every time it did happen, they always approach my car with a hand on their gun. So, you know, it's a little bit uncomfortable, you know.
That's Texas, man. Those
yeah,
Texas cops. You know what I'm
yeah,
talking
well,
about.
yeah, so it can be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, I do think for the most part, you know, people mean well. Police are needed in society. You can't have a society without police officers, and you know, like if we address the structural issues, I think that takes care of a lot of the problem. And we also have to look at it without diving too deep into the conspiracy hole. You know, what impacts culture? You would say it's music and movies, right, Lori? Would you say that has a really big, you know, impact on
absolutely.
culture? Yeah,
Sure.
So if you look at who owns the record labels, you know, like, and these movie companies, you know, they do, a lot of the record labels have common ownership with private prisons. So, you know, if you have record companies that share the same owners as private prisons.
I never thought of that. That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Never
if you have record companies that share the same ownership as private prisons, maybe there's like a thing going on where maybe we push people towards the violent music, the music that keeps them unproductive, the music that pushes hyper materialism, you know, the music that
gang banging,
glorifies,
you know, glorifies that,
violence, because you know, America
glorifies
like,
the strip club culture.
Exactly. Because think about it. You know, you had the blues, you had jazz, you had some of the most loving, like wonderful music that came out of like Black American culture.
And that was all about Black advancement.
Exactly.
Black excellence. You know?
Exactly.
Now it's the opposite.
Exactly. So my only thing is, when the people on the right, not all people on the right, but when some people on the right, you know, focus on culture, the part of the conversation that gets left out, okay, well, who owns the mechanisms that are kind of controlling the culture and manipulating the culture? So it's not Black people that own most record labels. Like that, I can tell you for sure.
Very few.
Yeah, it's
Very
very
few.
few, very few.
Right.
So it
And
does
Suge
tend to be.
Knight, yeah, he owned one of
Yeah.
the biggest ones. And where's Suge Knight now? Right.
Oh, he wasn't. He was like a man. He wasn't the ultimate shareholder though. You know, even with Suge Knight, because Death Row was under, I believe it was Sony. So and they're owned by they're owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, all those guys, and those guys also own private prisons. So so I do think it's worth following the money, looking at the data, and talking to people without assuming the worst. You know, like if I'm talking to someone who believes that systemic racism isn't real, I don't automatically assume that that person is racist, because
just uninformed, maybe.
Yeah, it's just uninformed, and people have different understandings of what that means, because some people hear the word systemic racism and they think that that person is saying all white people hate black people. So if that's what you think it means, then you're going to be 100% opposed to it.
And that's what a lot of, the programming in our culture is trying to tell us, especially during the Biden administration and the Obama administration. He shares a lot of the blame, because if you remember, during the Obama years, you weren't allowed to criticize Obama, because if you did, you were a racist.
White supremacist. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of that crying wolf, and because so much of that crying wolf happens, people ignore some of the systemic things. Like, I just saw something the other day. What is it? Like, are dogs racist if they bark at black people or bark at a black person or something like that? I'm like, yeah. So like the amount of things that you hear on a daily basis, like, wait, that's racist too? And then in response to George Floyd, they take Aunt Jemima.
Yes, right. Made no sense.
French toast, like what? So hold on. So because wolf has been cried so many times, I think there's a little bit of a fatigue going on. Like, I'm so tired of having this conversation. But the structural issues, what I would consider one of the most important things, which is again something that's unique to only America as far as developed countries go, we fund our education system off property taxes. Like in that local neighborhood. So by design, if you're born into a poor neighborhood, then your neighborhood has worse schools than people who are born into a wealthier neighborhood. So how can you call that equal opportunity when the neighborhood you're born into, decides what school you go to? And I don't think you'll ever have perfectly equal opportunity. You can't design a system in a way where it's perfectly equal, but it can be, improved to like from where it is today. So when I talk about systemic racism, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that, I don't know if you've seen any of these stories, but even when they do appraisals of homes, you can just Google, like differences in appraisal with white families versus black families. You have, stories out there of the same house gets appraised with family pictures of a black family and then family pictures of a white family, and there's a very big I'm not talking $10,000-$20,000, I'm talking a few $100,000 difference in the value of the property, and that's today. So that's not something that happened in the past.
Do you think that's gentrification?
Yeah, gentrification. I think the problem with gentrification is I think it also comes back to the opportunities themselves, because everyone wants nicer neighborhoods, right? But if you have a situation where you don't prepare the people, in the country, the people who live there for the kinds of jobs that are going to be opening up there, then they just get pushed out. And that's actually what happened to Turks and Caicos overall. And if I could just share like a quick story about that, because I think it could maybe like just open people's minds a little bit. When I grew up in Turks and Caicos, most people were poor, right? Now, I did have an advantaged background in Turks and Caicos. So, my family, my grandfather was a governor actually of Turks and Caicos for a little bit. He was working for the British government. So, like I was very blessed, as I was growing up over there. But most people over there there was a small middle class. There was a middle class, but it was relatively small. However, the entire time I was there were about 2 murders when I was living there over a span of 16 years in the entire country.
That's incredible.
In the entire country. So, and this is a country of about 40,000 people, right? So, and I know you don't believe this, but on Twitter, you have all kinds of opinions, but some people believe that Black folks are just, naturally more violent, because that's what the media has led them to believe. The entire time I was living in Turks and Caicos, there was, I want to say, 2 murders in about 16 years. And then what happened right before I left the country a few years after, before I left, is we started getting a tremendous amount of foreign investment and building up hotels, and the population grew. So we grew from about, I want to say, 20 to 25,000 around the 2000 mark. And now we're above 40,000, with about a third to half of that being illegal immigrants. So we have a gigantic portion of illegal immigrants that are mostly cheap labor, working on the hotels that get paid below minimum wage. So what we have now is a situation where there's actually more income inequality in the country than there was when everyone was poor. So even though there's more wealth in the country now, and maybe more of the local population has been lifted out of poverty, the violence within the local community has skyrocketed. And now, even though there's more money in the country and people, some people are doing better, it's actually per capita one of the most violent countries in the Caribbean. Now, I believe it does have the highest murder rate, or the second highest murder rate in the Caribbean, but all of these murders are concentrated, in the local poor areas. So if you're a tourist, you're going to be fine. So anyone out there who's watching this, if you're planning a trip to Turks and Caicos, don't cancel it. It's not
sounds like
dangerous
Mexico.
for you. Yeah, well, it's safer than Mexico.
Like Mexico.
You're not going to get kidnapped. It's safer than Mexico. But
right.
But yes, like, because of the way it grew, you had a tremendous amount of income inequality. So there are different things that contribute to violence, but one of the things that contributes to it a lot is, as basic as this may sound, it's actually the ability for men, because men are the ones who usually commit violence, the ability of men to provide for a family and gain respect from their peers. Like, that's of a large amount of men. That's actually the biggest predictor of violence. So if you have a situation where most people are poor together, then everyone respects each other. And, you still have a chance at, raising your family and finding a woman. But if you have a situation where you have a group of people, which may be, not a tiny group, but a sizable group of people who are doing really well, and then everyone else is doing really badly, and their perception is that the reason they're doing badly is because of corruption and life not being fair, they don't feel like they have to play by the rules, and they're going to they'll take the easy way out. They take the fast way. And this is something that's seen across, all different countries. The greater the income inequality, usually the more violence there is. So if you have
more crime,
where everyone is poor together, exactly. So if you have everyone poor together, there's less violence. And then, if you have more income inequality, there's more. Now, I'm also not going to say that's the only factor, because obviously that's not the only factor. There are other factors that go into it. And, like I said, to be brutally honest, if you go look at even the crime statistics in New York, it does tell, a worrying picture, because you do have income inequality over there. And if you look at the breakdown, between different groups, there is actually a difference, in violence, even though there is income inequality amongst all groups. So it's not the only factor. Culture is a factor too. So, if you have a culture that, glorifies violence, that does have an impact on it. So, but before you blame, only the people in the culture, you also have to look at who's pulling the strings at the top. So don't just look at, okay, there's higher violence among one specific group. Let's look at the reasons why that may have happened. Has this group been traumatized? Do the people who own their music also own private prisons? You take into account all these different things. And I think there's a multitude of reasons why, you can have differences in violence levels. But a lot of that does come down to systemic factors when you trace it all the way up. Because even with the culture, like I said before, like if the music and the media are owned by one group of people, and this is what's pushed to people, and this is the opportunities that people have, and they don't have great schools, they don't see that many examples of success around them, like it's easier to get trapped into a cycle of negativity and to be led down the wrong path. So I'm not someone who believes like your race makes you nice, makes you good, makes you bad, makes you violent, or anything like that. But we do have to just look at the cultural factors that are impacting things and then trace it back to the root. Why is this culture like this? What happened to make this culture, like operate how it is? And if we can address more of the root causes to those issues and get equal opportunity, and we try to hold music labels accountable, and we try to hold people accountable for what they put out, and self accountability comes into it too, because at the end of the day, yes, the record labels may control who gets signed, but they still depend on us to listen to their music. So there is personal accountability.
Well, that's right. And I'm so old. I remember the 1980s and the first wave of rap and some of the stuff like NWA and Ice-T that the federal government was actually trying to censor and putting pressure on record labels like Warner Brothers and telling them, to pull Ice-T's record off the shelves for Cop Killer, that record he did called Cop Killer, because they thought it would encourage young Black people to shoot cops, right? So I'm not a fan of censorship. I stood against it then. I still stand against it now. I think that artists should be free to create whatever kind of music they want.
Agreed.
Because, for example, NWA, yeah, there were a lot of violent and sexist themes in their music, but it was real poetry that exposed real life in communities.
It was their experience.
That,
it was their
white
experience.
kids
And
like
just to be
me
clear,
didn't grow up in, and we didn't understand it. And that was how we came to understand it, was through this raw, uncensored art. But there's also a social responsibility that I feel artists are forgetting, that they have a responsibility to the youth that listen to their records. The government shouldn't censor it, but the artists should be careful what kind of culture they're glorifying in their music videos, in their songs. If it's not really a social commentary, then it's just gratuitous violence and gratuitous sex, and it's pointless. And I think that's a really bad influence on all young people, not just the Black community, because a lot of white kids and kids of all colors like to listen to rap music. But that sort of ties into where I want to take this conversation next. On the issue of censorship, you and I recently did a great Twitter space about that very topic, and how Robert F. Kennedy is suing not only Joe Biden, he's suing the Biden administration for censoring him and censoring all of us, violating all Americans' First Amendment rights. But he's also suing Facebook, Meta, Instagram, YouTube, Google. He's suing them all. But he did a really interesting interview this week, and I wanted to play you a quick clip from this where he's talking about something that most young people today have no idea what it was, because they're not old enough to remember it. But I am, because I remember the 80s, a thing called the fairness doctrine. And this applies to media. People today ask, why does news suck so bad? Why is it so one-sided and unfair and slanted and partisan? The fairness doctrine is why. And I could explain it, but I think Bobby does a better job than I can in this little video. He nails it right here. And I think that it's a cancer on our society. And as a journalist, I think it's a cancer on our media landscape. When we got rid of the fairness doctrine, I think we made a terrible mistake, and Bobby agrees. Let's take a listen.
One of the problems with our democracies, and one of the problems was the repeal of the fairness doctrine. And I'd like you to explain what that is. And the reason I'm asking you is because that single act led to the propagation of information and media that no longer is about the truth. It's about polarization. And that was a very disturbing moment in American history that I don't think most people caught.
Congress passed it in 1928 at the dawn of commercial radio to make sure there was a diversity of voices. Fairness doctrine said you could only own a limited number of radio stations because they didn't want one corporate conglomerate to be able to control the narrative. It was recognized that the public owned the airwaves and that the broadcasters could be licensed to use them, but they could only use them to serve the public interest. And what that meant is, yes, they could make money by selling entertainment to you on the radio, but they had to tell the news that was important for forming government policies, at least for a certain amount of minutes or hours per day. And particularly when the television came along, they had to do it at a time when most families would be home. That's why we had the 6 o'clock news hour, because they thought all Americans are going to be home. The news divisions had to be independent. They had to be telling truth. If they told one side of the story, if there were two sides, you had to let the other people tell their side of the story. That was the fairness doctrine. And that's why during that period, the news divisions were basically semi-autonomous and they were all money losers because the network would put the money in them because that's the only way they could hold on to their license. And then in 1986, Reagan abolished the fairness doctrine through FCC policy, so that today I think there's 5 companies, maybe now only 4, that control virtually all the radio stations, television stations in our country, almost all the newspapers, almost all the billboards, and most of the large internet content providers. So you have this huge consolidation where there's 5 guys who are now telling American what's news, and there's no obligation anymore that they have to tell the truth. The bean counters at NBC are now telling NBC News Division, you got to show a profit. How do you show a profit if you're a news division? Not by having reporters in every country in the world and reporters in every agency of government. There used to be reporters when I was a kid. There'd be a reporter at EPA from NBC. There'd be a reporter full-time at the Commerce Department, at the Transportation Department. They'd be digging through papers all day, uncovering scandals and revealing them to the public. That's all gone. And they show a profit, not by telling us news that may be difficult to explain or hear, but rather by entertaining us. And then they do a lot of partisan propaganda and corporate propaganda. It's very, very damaging to our democracy, as our founders predicted. If you like.
Yeah. Right on the money. And, I wanted to share a personal story because I've been a journalist for 35 years. And I started in journalism in the year 1986. I had just gotten out of college. So I went to college for 4 years to learn the craft of journalism. And I was trained a certain way. What they taught us and our generation of journalists in school was fairness to both sides. Objectivity was sacred. And that was because of the fairness doctrine, because literally we could not skew a story one way or the other. It was against the law. The fairness doctrine, when I started in journalism, we were required by law to give both sides of a story. And certainly if it's, say, a hit piece on someone, we had to go to that person and ask them for comment and give them the opportunity to defend themselves, to respond. And it's one of the biggest mistakes I think that Ronald Reagan made in his time of office, was getting rid of the fairness doctrine. And it's not a coincidence, believe me, Jay, that our media landscape has become so partisan and so slanted and, yes, so corporate since the abolition of the fairness doctrine. And Bobby's been saying now for, at least 20 years that we need to bring back the fairness doctrine. I've heard him say it many times in his speeches over the years, but now that he's running for president, he would actually be in a position to do something about it other than just talk. I think that maybe, just maybe, we could get Congress to pass a new fairness doctrine that's updated for the 21st century, that includes internet technology, so that, that in itself could be a possible solution to the censorship that we see online through big tech. One solution would be regulating big tech. Another would be a fairness doctrine, internet fairness doctrine, where every social media platform is required to let all points of view have their say. All candidates would be covered fairly and have fair, even coverage across the board. If we did that, Kennedy wouldn't be in the pickle he's in today, being censored everywhere as a presidential candidate. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that and the fairness doctrine and the state of journalism and media right now.
Yeah, I think it affects pretty much every issue, because if you look at every issue, there is a stance that's either left or right for most issues. And, even though the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, like on a lot of these things. So if people who are on the right, they get their news from, not all people who are on the right, but some people who are on the right get their news from Fox News, Breitbart. Some people who are on the left, they get their news from CNN and New York Times, and it's completely polarized. Like he said, if you read, a mainstream, if you read or if you watch news from the left, then people on the right are all racist and xenophobic. And if you look at news on the right, then people on the left are all hippies who just want handouts from the government. And these are the two caricatures that each side holds of each other. And it's because each issue gets framed in a way so whatever audience it is you're speaking to, you want to reinforce whatever it is they already believe. And if you know that they believe that the left are just lazy hippies looking for handouts, every policy they propose is being viewed from that perspective. And, it's the same thing on the right. Like now you have, Eric Adams over in New York saying how the city's going to collapse if they don't stop this illegal immigration, when literally the last time the man was in an election, he said how racist Trump was and how, New York City will remain a sanctuary city forever. We're going to take in everybody. We have space for everyone.
Yeah, and turns out you don't.
Before that term is over, he's now saying the city will collapse if we don't stop the illegal immigrant flow. So that's a perfect example about how an issue that's so reasonable. I'm sure there's some Republican or some people on the right, I should say, who want to end all immigration, but that's not the majority of the people on the right. Most people I know who are conservative, because you're not my only conservative friend. I have, friends from all over the political spectrum. Most of them believe that, yes, controlled immigration is good. Like when we know what skills are coming into the country, when we know what they'll be contributing, that's good. So most people on the right don't want to completely end immigration. They just want to know who's coming in and out of the border. And they recognize that it's easy for people to pass from Mexico to America. So they'd like to put up a physical barrier to prevent people like from getting in as easily. Are there other ways to do it? I'm sure, but will it be as easy as literally walking across the border? It won't be that easy. So, for that issue, which should be common sense, do you want to know who's coming into your country? That should be common sense. That shouldn't be like a right or a left issue. It's now framed as you're either for open borders or you're racist, or
that's right.
Or if you're on the left, then you think, if you're on the right, then you think everyone on the left just wants, completely open borders. And the truth is, Biden's actually worse, than most of his other counterparts on the issue, because he's completely open the border now.
The absolute worst ever.
Yeah.
He flung the southern border open on day one of his administration. And it's only gotten worse now that Title 42's gone away. You see it every day. You're down there in Texas. I lived in Texas for 25 years, and it was a problem 25 years ago. But back then, the biggest problem we had were Mexican migrants coming in, and it was a humanitarian disaster even then. Jay, not one summer went by, and you know how hot it gets down there in Texas. It's 100 degrees plus for 3 months straight, and it's horrible. But they would have every year, you could count on it. It's like clockwork. Some semi truck would be found abandoned because the coyotes who were driving in this truckload of illegals, they're trapped in the back of the truck with no fresh air, no water, no food, and something spooked the driver, and the driver ran away and left those people to die. And they would find the truck sometimes days, weeks later with all of these bodies in it, and these people died horrific deaths. And it's been a regular occurrence every summer in Texas for 30 years at least. But what's different now is that we see this influx of migrants coming in from all over the world this year. And during the Biden years, we're not just seeing the usual, the Mexicans coming here looking for a better life. We see people not just from Latin America, but from China, from the Middle East, from Ukraine, Afghanistan. Obviously, we know that after the war ended in Afghanistan.
I think I figured out how we can get people on the left to care about this issue more. Do you want to hear what it is?
Yes. How is that?
Let them know that Russians can get through that border too. If you let them know that Russians could actually come across the border and might sneak into the country, exactly. Maybe that'll wake them up.
Use their Russophobia as a
tool.
Tell
them Putin is sending spies, like on the back of the Mexican cartel trucks, to go set up, Hunter Biden to make it look like he does drugs. Yeah, that's what's going on. So the Russians are running more operations through the Mexican border. You tell them that, maybe
they'll close that border real quick.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, that's something I like that Kennedy says in his approach to the border. Like you said, we tend to make that such a partisan issue that you're either a racist if you want to have a sane immigration policy, or it's just open borders for all. But he takes that middle ground that makes the most sense and the most humanitarian approach. He understands that this is a humanitarian crisis. He understands that the migrant workers who are coming here looking for a better life, not only are they putting their own lives at risk because these coyotes who bring them here are predators. We've got children being kidnapped, raped, killed. We've got, like I talked about, the truckloads of migrants who are just abandoned in the desert to die. He sees the humanitarian side of it. And if you've seen his film, the documentary film, Midnight at the Border, which I hope everyone will watch, he's out there doing something that you'll never see Donald Trump do.
And
he's
if you think about it,
he's kissing them.
That actually took a lot of courage, for him to do that. And I'm not trying to blow it up out of proportion, but something could have happened over there, because that, he still did it because he wanted to shine a light on that issue. And, I really do have a ton of respect for him because he's tackling issues that he knows are controversial, but he's trying to get to the truth of it. And in addition to everything you mentioned just now, he's the only candidate who I've seen tie American foreign policy directly to the immigration crisis. I heard Bernie Sanders, speak about reining in foreign policy, but I never really heard him connect it to the immigration crisis. I don't believe. And, Kennedy is straight up saying, we're part of the problem here. We have overthrown their governments and funded, rebel groups that have terrorized these countries. And because of that, people are fleeing those countries. So he's trying to, number one, address the root cause of that by closing down a lot of those military bases and, and kind of reining in some of the agencies that are causing these problems over there. And he's trying to protect the border in a sensible way while also recognizing there are reasons to invite qualified immigrants into the country. If you were to ask me my opinion on border policy, we need to put out a big notice to the entire world. Nurses and doctors, we'll pay you guys a bunch of money. Just come over here real quick, because I think that's, in addition to, that's an issue that a lot of people aren't thinking about right now, but it will become more apparent as time goes on. We do have a healthcare staffing issue that will need to be addressed too. We do need more healthcare workers in the country. And to be honest, I think that's something, unfortunately, politicians don't speak enough about, because if anyone wanted to make a good program to, help poor communities, Black communities, whatever kind of community it is. Give them, access to a school where they can learn something in healthcare. And, whether it's, like tuition that they can pay back later, whether you make sure they have access to tutors so they can get all the extra help they need. I think there should be a strong push towards that field because it can lift people up out of poverty. And there's a huge shortage in that area right now. So I do hope people do start paying a little bit more attention to that.
There's just one other thing I want to play here from Bobby because, this really got me upset when I heard about this week. The Democratic Party, the DNC, now, they've been coming after Kennedy this whole time, but now they are proposing new changes to the rules, basically saying that, well, he can explain it better than I can. I should probably let him do the talking, but essentially these rules are being proposed. If these changes go through, it'll be the end of his campaign in the Democratic Party. Finished. He absolutely will have no path to the nomination. His delegates will not count at the convention next year. It's outrageous. And they've created a whole new class of super delegates to ensure that Bobby Kennedy gets nowhere near the nomination. And this is just so insane, Jay. I have to play this for you. You absolutely won't believe it if you haven't heard this yet, what the Democrats are doing now to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I think, it's pretty clear that the DNC does not want a primary. I don't want to say that they want a coronation, but that's, I think that's a fair way to put it, actually. They're doing, they're essentially, they're fixing the process so that it makes it almost impossible to have democracy function. They're effectively disenfranchising the Democratic voters from having any choice in who becomes president or who becomes the Democratic nominee. So two of the things they've done to date is they've moved the Iowa primary. They've made rules that if anybody campaigns in Iowa or any candidate sets foot in the state of Iowa or sets foot in the state of New Hampshire, then none of the votes that are cast for that candidate will be tallied. In other words, any delegate that I win in New Hampshire or Iowa would go instead to the president. And now they're trying to change it so that if I campaign in New Hampshire, that none of the votes cast for me in Georgia will count. And that's significant because it's hard to win the nomination without Georgia.
What is the logic?
Well, they're rigging it so that it, effectively, we're looking at the tabulations now that look like if you add up all the super delegates that they control and all of the automatic delegates that just go to the party and go to the president, I would have to win almost 80% of all of the states in order to beat President Biden, even if he only wins 20%.
And yet you continue on. So what is your strategy then in light of this for defeating President Biden?
These rules will not be finalized until September 14th. And we've written the DNC protesting. I mean, there's some really wild things that they're now considering, including forcing me to actually pay for the primaries. And their logic is that they don't need a primary because they already have a candidate. And therefore, I'm costing them all this money, and that money should be paid for by me and, maybe Marianne Williamson. So it's not, it's a process that is rigged. And we live at a time in American history when a lot of Americans think that democracy is broken, that the system, the political system is rigged, and that there's not really any democracy. And unfortunately, the DNC is taking a lot of steps that confirm that outlook.
You mentioned you're going to South Carolina. How is this impacting your strategy around Iowa and New Hampshire in light of what the new DNC rules are?
Well, I'm campaigning in those states, so I'm going to campaign, continue to campaign in those states. Those are important states for the American democracy. They're really the only states that really require you to do retail politics, to go to the barbershops, the nail salons, the diners, to meet people on the street, and to actually talk to voters other than just donors. The other states, you are content with having candidates kind of aerial bombard them from 30,000 feet with advertising that is, the DNC has $2 billion now in their bank account. That's all, all given by, or most of it given by large donors, and that they can use that money to do slick campaign ads, and President Biden will not actually ever have to meet a donor. And then they have occasionally, maybe he'll do a rally in which they're very heavily orchestrated, in which everybody who goes to that rally is screened, and there's nothing unexpected, and there's no unscripted contact with voters. And I don't think that's good for democracy if the only people that President Biden is talking to is his donors. Because then he's living in a bubble, and he's living in a bubble where he's only talking to very, very wealthy Americans who aren't enduring many of the hardships that are facing the majority of the people in this country. That 57% of the people in this country can't put their hands on $1,000 if there's an emergency in their lives. That means if the engine light comes on in their car, they don't have the pay for it. And I think the president and President Trump or whoever are the candidates on the Republican side ought to be talking to those people and understanding, because both President Trump and President Biden are saying that they're running on the record of prosperity that they've left to this country. And what I'm doing, traveling around this country and actually talking to people, I'm not seeing Americans, when they hear that, they feel like they're being gaslighted, because they're not living in happy days are here again. They're watching kids who cannot buy a home.
That's right, Bobby. That's right. Okay, I'm going to leave that there because we're running out of time. This 2 hours have flown by. But where is that prosperity, Bobby? And have you had enough yet of the Democratic Party, Mr. Kennedy? Some of us have been trying to tell you since day one of the campaign that you don't stand a chance in this corrupt party. Only now, and in that interview with Forbes, we didn't have time to play it, but he said he was finally exploring other alternatives, was how he put it. And we all know what that means. It means he's thinking about leaving the Democratic Party. Do you think he should, Jay?
I saw that interview, and to be honest with you, I think there's two ways it could play out. Number one, I think that the DNC might realize that they might pass a threshold by making this move, and they would lose confidence from the people who they actually, they would lose the confidence from the majority of their own base, and they would completely undermine themselves. That is possible. What do I think is going to happen? I hope that happens. I don't know. I'm like 50-50 on if that happens or if they go through with them cheating. What I will say is if they do pass these laws or these new, process changes, which I believe he said should happen in mid-September, I would 100% support him, no matter which party he goes to. If he goes to the Republican ticket, I vote for him. If he goes to the People's Party, I would vote for him. Now, what I would say is I think it would be more productive in the long run for him to run in a third party, because I think the duopoly is done. So whether that's with the People's Party, the Forward Party, the Libertarian Party, whichever party it is, I think it would be more beneficial for him to try to build up a third one. Do I think that he could beat Trump for the nomination in the Republican Party? I'm not sure, but to be honest, I doubt it. So I do think the best move would be to go to an independent party, because while I would support him in the Republican Party, I don't think he would get very many Democrats. But I do think that if he ran in an independent party, he would get probably a similar amount of the Republicans that would vote for him anyway, and he'd have a better chance at getting some of the Democrats, because what I can say is, if the DNC is able to pull off this,
you are not alone. Yeah. You are not alone, Jay.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you. I wanted to show you real quick. I wanted to take the public's pulse on that very question. Should he leave the Democratic Party? And if he left, how should he run and which party should he run with? So I posted a poll on Twitter, and it's still open. I hope that everybody will go vote. If you go to my Twitter, I'm at Real Lori Spencer on Twitter. And the poll right now, independent overwhelmingly is winning this poll. Almost 70% of people who voted say that he should run as an independent candidate. Only 17% say he should run as a Democrat. 8% say he should run as a Republican. And then, of course, Twitter only gives you 4 options. So I had to make third party kind of the extra option. And I asked people to comment below if they thought he should run with the Libertarian Party or the Green Party or the Forward Party or the People's Party, to indicate which party they wanted to see him with. But still, even that is 11.6%. So the poll is still open. I would like for everyone to vote, no matter what your political persuasion might be, because I really want to make this poll fair. And, Republicans, I know a lot of Republicans really, really like Robert Kennedy and would vote for him. I also think he would have probably a better path in the Republican Party, because their primaries are more fair. He would have a chance to debate the other candidates, and I think he'd mop the floor with most of them, honestly. And I want to see him debate President Trump, so that would be awesome if he ran as a Republican. We're almost out of time. We're going to continue this. Sorry?
Do you think Trump would debate him? Because he said he's not going to any of the debates too. I don't think Trump would debate him. I don't think anyone can win the Republican Party except for Trump, especially because they've gone after him so hard right now. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't think anyone can win it except Trump at this point.
Oh, man. Well, I tell you what, we've only got 2 minutes. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We're going to have to wrap this up, but we're going to continue this conversation tomorrow night on Twitter. We're going to do a Twitter space, and Jay will be there with me. Nick Brana, who's the chair of the People's Party, also worked on Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. He's been there, done that, seen all this before with the DNC. I think he'll bring a lot of wisdom. And we will have Anita Stewart from the Kennedy campaign. Kennedy campaign staffer will also be there. So it's going to be an amazing conversation, folks. I hope you'll join us. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow night, and we will continue this conversation with Jay. Real quick, Jay, can you tell folks where they can find you and where they can follow you?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Jay Ascension. You can also find me on Instagram at Jay Scott Ascension, and of course look for me on Rumble at the Jay Scott Ascension, and you'll find me on there. I was on YouTube, but I stopped uploading over there because of censorship. So but yes, it's all about Rumble now.
We don't use YouTube much around here anymore either. So folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Jay, thank you for the interview. I will see you tomorrow night on Twitter, and hopefully I'll see everybody else tomorrow night on Twitter. And we'll see you back here next Saturday night for Strange Bedfellows. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes Strange Bedfellows.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.